Hey YouTube, Mike the Alpha Hoarder here. If you're new to the channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, thanks so much for swinging by again. Today I'm adding a couple of things to my hoard, and I wanted to have a conversation about how sustainable the MTG hobby is long term. It's something that's come up in a couple of my videos and more than once by the viewers, and I thought we could dig into it together. So, one of the biggest questions, if you're in the hobby as an investor or a collector specifically, is what happens when, say, my generation ages out? That is to say, the people who were kids or, say, up to teenagers in the mid-90s. What's going to happen to the hobby after we leave? So, for any collectible category to persist over time, demand needs to persist over time, obviously. But for prices to increase, demand needs to not only persist, but the spread between supply and demand needs to increase. Right? Basic economics so far. There are two ways that you can get that spread to increase. The first is purely by the supply shrinking. Now that seems inevitable to happen, but on its own, it doesn't actually point to the long-term health of the hobby. In fact, it could be a hint that the hobby is going extinct. The other way to build a spread between supply and demand is if the demand keeps growing. And that is really what I think we want as collectors and investors in some of these old cards. So like I said, a few viewers commented about this. I've had several people email me. This guy looks nice, except for the centering. A couple of chipping. I had a few people email me on the subject. And I thought we could unpack it together. So it seems to me, in giving this some thought, that there are two things that that this hobby is going to be contingent on going into the future. The first one is the persistence of the game Magic the Gathering. And the second one is an interest in the old stuff by the newer players. So yeah, let's take that apart a bit. Let me just tear this open. Let's unpack that a bit. So, the game. Magic is obviously a game meant to be played. And while it is conceivable that YouTube videos or influencers or whatever could reach new audiences, this is cool, well assembled, could reach new audiences, you know, apart from the game. I think far and away the most likely way for someone to find the hobby is by first discovering the game. You know, that's what happened with me. You know, I do still play, and I happen to be drawn, as a collector, I happen to be drawn to the cards that perform in the game. So, you know, it's conceivable that Hasbro could vanish and the current catalog of cards could still be playable for years. You know, not everything happens under the sort of arm of Hasbro. Commander was invented outside of Hasbro. But that just doesn't seem very likely to me. You know, if the game is not super mainstream and, you know, didn't go viral now with the advertising engine of Hasbro behind it, it doesn't seem very likely that it would happen later without it, you know, without that engine behind it. The other thing that I think is that the presence of cards in stores, local game stores and big box stores, as well as new cards being featured, I think that marketing is important, and I also think that the new products that allow the secondary market to exist are necessary, because without the secondary market, you know, the accessibility of the game is just gone. So the best way for people to enter the hobby is by playing the game, I believe. And thus, if we want growth in the hobby, in order to continue to push or even just maintain prices into the future, we depend on the game continuing to be popular, in my opinion. Ooh, excellent. 2 rares that nobody cares about except me. And some of the people watching this channel. It does delight me to encounter other people who share the passion, who get it. So in Pokemon, this question comes up a lot. This isn't a hobby I'm very deep into, but I do find it interesting listening to some of the channels that discuss the Pokemon hobby. One of the things that they talk about is the sort of breadth of the, you know, it's the biggest pop culture franchise. As of March, the Pokemon Company had printed 43 billion cards. They had sales of 440 million video game units. They had 192 different locations where Pokemon-related shows were syndicated. That brand is able to inject itself into the mainstream, you know, sort of continuously and from different angles, and it's pretty impressive. Magic never achieved that. Wizards, Hasbro has not achieved that. You know, it's just not a brand at the level of say, Pokemon, and I don't think it's going to be. You know, they have got something like 50 books, but, you know, no real bestsellers there. They've had, I don't know, a dozen video games on different systems. None of those are blockbusters. 2 clean rares. I will always take them. I don't care what the rare is. And this should be a beautiful pile of commons, so take a look at that. You know, does it matter? I don't think it does. The reason I'm mentioning Pokemon, though, by comparison, is just to point out that the success of this brand, the success of Magic the Gathering, is very unidimensional, right? The success of the paper game is identical to the success of the brand. There is no diversification of input factors. And, you know, I'm not saying that's a huge deal, but it definitely increases the risk a bit. And, you know, the presence of risk does not mean something can't succeed, obviously, but it should be observed and noted. We are very dependent on the success of just the game. Lovely. I'm expecting a pile of these. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, look at that. Whew. It's going to be a good day. I can already tell. I can already tell. So, what does this game have going for it? Well, in 2018, there were 35 million players, estimated. In 2021, there were 40 million. So that means on a 3-year basis, we're adding about 5 million players. So, okay, that's something. The game began in 1993, and it's still running in 2022. So that has proven that the game itself, the franchise, is multi-generational. As a game, that is separate from as a collectible. And it seems to me that means we have passed the first great filter. You know, the brand / pop culture appeal, it's not tied just to a single generation. You know, things like Elvis memorabilia or Beanie Babies, they did not get through that filter. So that's good. We do have that going for us. And, you know, so far Hasbro has been able to maintain the health of the game, but that is an ongoing dependency. They have to continue to do that. And, you know, they make their mistakes. You know, they're certainly making a few mistakes right now. Too much product, too much levering of reprint equity, too much treating it all like a big money machine instead of a game. But they've gone through cycles like this in the past. They've course corrected. I think we can be reasonably confident that they'll continue to do that. But again, that is an ongoing dependency. So, supposing the brand is stable and the game does continue, that's only one of the two dependencies that I mentioned. In addition to that, we need new players to be interested in the old stuff. So, I mean, will somebody entering the hobby today, 20 years from now, will they want an Alpha Mons Goblins Raiders? Or will they want, a vintage Double Masters etched foil? What about, Beta Unlimited, the Four Horsemen? Just to switch it up, I'm going to open a few of these too. I got a pile that have been sitting here waiting for a video. The two largest market takers are the players and the collectors. So what's going to bring them to the old cards? Well, players will be pulled to the old stuff, at least initially, maybe primarily, based on the dynamics of the reserved list. Ooh, it seems to me. Maybe for bling or sort of to have the OG, but by and large, there are game tokens that are just not available anywhere else, and it will force new players to get exposed to the old sets. I'm not exactly sure how primary that is as a factor, but it's worth noting that if that is a significant factor, we do onboard an arguable amount of risk there. It requires that the reserve list continue to exist and not be effectively circumvented. I do actually have a separate video about that in the queue, but just quickly, so as to not go off on a tangent. That is a really nice fast bond. The centering isn't bad. A lot of times this card is not centered. Ooh, very nice. Just quickly though, I doubt that they're going to break the reserve list, but they can easily circumvent it, and so it's not worth completely discounting that. I would continue to carry that as a risk factor, however we choose to weight it. So we've got two factors so far: Hasbro's ability to continue growing the game, and now Hasbro's respect for the reserve list insofar as the old cards remain relevant to new players, not just collectors and investors. So if we get that far, we've got the popular brand, we've got new players entering, we've got a reserve list that's pushing players to seek out the older cards. There is now an overlap between players and collectors. Some amount of players are going to become collectors. I don't know how often it happens the other way around. I do know of it happening. My father was that way. I'm sure there is something to that still, but just sticking with the players converting to collectors thing, it's a little bit hard to predict how many will do that. But some people just have the collector gene. I imagine many of the people watching this channel know exactly what I mean. I certainly have that. There is a 1998 book by Susan M. Pierce. It's called Collecting in Contemporary Practice. She opens the book citing some data that was recorded in the 1980s, and that data showed that 25 to 30% of adults identified as collectors. And then in the book, she proceeds to replicate those results, and also finds 30% of people identify as collectors of something. Ooh, Granite Gargoyle. Chris Rush. So 30%, that's a really big number. That's really big. It doesn't mean that 1 out of 3 people who touch Magic are going to become Magic collectors, of course. But it does tell me that it's not a rare thing. Not even a little bit rare. So we'll get new players in the game. They'll encounter the older cards, as a consequence of the reserved list at least. And some of them will become collectors. Will they want to collect the old stuff? So one way we can sort of dig into that is by looking at other collecting categories and see what happens in other spaces. This guy has a bit more surface damage than I realized. That's too bad. Wonder what happened to him. Doesn't look like playware. It looks like got damaged while getting put away. Where? It's too bad. Still love the card. So I don't spend that much time in other hobbies, so certainly I would appreciate some second opinions on what I'm going to spin through now. But you know, I did take a look, and some recurring patterns do kind of pop out. It does seem to be the case that collectors very often go for the most rare original stuff, like all the time. Part of the thrill of collecting is getting unique things, getting the historical pieces. You know, that's part of the passion of being a collector. You learn a hobby, you learn its history, you seek its roots. Far and away the largest category, with, you know, sort of a good sideways comparison, I think, is sports cards. And you know, one example would be, say, the T206 line of tobacco cards. These were printed in 1909 to 1911. And you know, sports cards are obviously still popular today, and you know, they're relevant. People are entering that hobby every day. So you might ask yourself, do modern collectors seek the 206 cards? They never grew up with those players, you know, or even in a time when those players were relevant. They didn't live when those cards were in circulation, and it's possible they never even heard of some of the players, you know, that appear in that set. But the answer, as you probably know, is they absolutely do. In 2019, a T206 Honus Wagner sold for $1.2 million. And in 2021, an SGC3, same card, sold for over $6.6 million. And I can tell you for sure, neither of those buyers were alive 110 years ago. You see the same thing in numismatics. Collectors gravitate to the old, you know, valuable historic stuff, notes that predate their own childhood or anything like that. Comic books, you know, you see high values placed on books, on the sort of the same iconic books. It's not really a gradual shift towards more recent stuff, you know, like you might expect from younger hobbyists entering the hobby. So I guess the lesson to take away from that is that nostalgia is only one of the motivating factors behind a collector instinct. And so, having given this a bit more thought, what seems likely to me is that MTG collectors will probably want nice sets of the cards that are nostalgic for them. So I actually have this myself. I've got a pile of slabs I showed much earlier on of revised edition dual lands, and those are entirely nostalgic pieces for me. And then I also have a Jace the Mind Sculptor that I actually drafted when I briefly popped back into the hobby in 2010. And it makes sense that that'll still happen. So people will want the nostalgic cards, which will scale with when they entered the hobby. But as we see in other collectible categories, that doesn't come at the exclusion of also seeking the sort of, what would you call them, canonical trophies of the hobby, whatever that hobby might be. At least that's what we see elsewhere. So, you know, why should it be different for Magic? You know, I don't think it would. So let's just dig a little bit deeper here. I know some of these videos get a little long. Let's keep in mind that it's a different statement than saying every ABU plus 4 Horsemen plus Silver Age card is going to be able to sustain enormous prices, right? It does seem to me that the rarest stuff, and again, I don't know if that just means alpha or if the rarest includes everything through, you know, the 4 Horsemen or everything through the Silver Age, you know, I don't know, but it does seem very likely the rarest stuff is going to be attractive to collectors of any age. But it's going to come down to the numbers and the ratios if you're trying to, predict the market on a sort of higher level. Look at that, 2 Chaos Laces. Everybody's least favorite card. So, I've said it before that this stuff is more speculative, I think, than most of my peers in the hobby probably think. And, we've broken down to 3 factors that are going to impact that speculation. So again, Hasbro's ability to continue growing the game. Hasbro's respect for the reserved list insofar as old cards are going to be relevant to new players and not just collectors. Which, like I said, to me, that is the oxidizer that might convert players into collectors. And then the third factor now is what percent of players will make that conversion. Now, I'm a collector at heart. Obviously, I wouldn't be able to justify the amount of money that goes into this if I thought it was all going to lose value. So, although I'm a collector at heart, I wouldn't be doing a collection like this if I just thought I was throwing my money out the window. That said, if this stuff doesn't appreciate greatly, if this trends sideways over the next 20 years, and thus way underperforms the stock market, I don't really care. I love having the cards. I love the art. I love the memories, the history. I love the people I'm meeting as I venture into the hobby. So, my eyes are wide open to this risk, to the speculative nature of it, the possibility that I won't get an ROI on this portion of my portfolio. I really am okay with that. I suspect Alpha will continue to appreciate. There just isn't enough of it, in my opinion. Each set you move away from Alpha, though, it becomes slightly more speculative and slightly higher risk. And that's just because of how much it depends on the numbers. And really, this all comes back to that first factor of Hasbro's ability to grow the game. So I just want to walk through one example of that just to show you how dependent it is on that one factor. And then we can call it a day. And the red horde is going to be very happy today. Look at that. I love it when it makes an alpha collage. Okay, so let's do a little bit of guesswork here. Suppose 10 years from now, there are 55 million players playing Magic. All I'm doing there is extrapolating. So, we had the data point from 2018, from 2021, 5 million players every 3 years. So in 10 years, we'll be from 40 to about 55. So assuming linear growth. Now suppose 1 out of 10 players become collectors. That is well below the 30% from Susan's research and from the earlier 1980s research that was conducted. So seems reasonable. And then let me also pull in the deceptively complicated term of the 1%. And let's assume 1% of the collectors, so 1 in 100, have the budget for the old stuff. So, out of a 55 million player base, that's 55,000 high-end collectors. There are only 16,000 each of these. Less than half after attrition. I've proposed less than 10% in good condition. Less than that even if you take into account the number that are locked away into, the diamond hand sets or whatever you want to call them. That's just not enough for 55,000 high-end collectors. And a card like this, 1,008, 1,000 before attrition. How can that supply satisfy the demand base of 55,000 collectors? And the answer is it just can't. It won't. And so the price will reflect that. And at numbers like that, there'll be plenty of demand left over. If you move if you move past alpha, you know, as the price barrier lowers, we can expand outside the 1%. You know, so if the hobby keeps growing in that way, I expect there's plenty of room for demand for, you know, beta, unlimited, Four Horsemen, silver set. There's probably even a minimal risk if, you know, collections start appearing on the market, which, you know, you'd expect when my generation leaves. You would expect some number of collections that sat with somebody for their life. That person, you know, kicks the bucket or whatever. Collections are going to show up, so you will expect a bit of that. But if the game has continued to grow and collector interest has continued to grow, I don't really worry about that. That would be a very desirable supply-demand curve if your interest is asset appreciation long term. But I invented those numbers, and I'm sure you can imagine, you know, how easily this can go the other way. So let's just change the scenario very slightly. Suppose Hasbro takes a big dump. Over the next decade, the player base drops to 10 million. People go to other games, you know, chronic wallet fatigue just strikes too hard. There's a feedback loop. Player base drops. Ooh, love this guy. Okay, so using the same estimates, say 10% of your players convert to collectors, and say 1% of those collectors are high value collectors. Out of a 10 million player base, you now only have 1,000 high net worth collectors. That is not enough to keep prices rising. That might not even be enough to support the current prices, especially if, you know, those private collections emerge from the diamond hand storage or whatever. Quick aside, diamond hand storage would be a great name for a vault company. So if anyone's looking for that, you can have that one. There you go. But you know, 1,000 high value collectors, that's just too small of a group to maintain pressure maybe on any of the expansion sets, right? You know, we would then be in the situation I brought up in the beginning, where the only factor on the price, on the spread between supply and demand, is a shrinking supply. And that can work for a while. You know, even if your collector base is dropping, if your supply base is dropping more, there'll still be a small number of cards that few set of people is willing to spend a lot of money on. But it is sort of a death spiral for a collectible category at that point. And so, as I keep saying, the conclusion that I sort of drew as I was thinking through this is that a huge part of the speculation in MTG finance is on the long-term health of the game, Magic the Gathering. We are all placing bets that Hasbro can keep this ship pointed in the right direction and will keep bringing people into the hobby. And we are betting that the vintage pieces will still be relevant to the state of the game 10 years from now because of the reserve list or, you know, whatever. We're speculating, more soundly I'd say, that a steady percent of the players will turn into collectors and will be motivated to seek the original stuff, even the stuff they didn't grow up with. And that would be my take on the 10 to 15 year horizon with this stuff. There are absolutely reasonable, arguably probable roads ahead of us that push alpha, beta, unlimited, the Four Horsemen, to the stratosphere, or at least, you know, to practical ceilings. However, there are also perfectly believable courses ahead of us that see the hobby peak, decline, and most of the old stuff lose value. You know, a stagnant player base might be enough to keep ABU up, but maybe not, you know, the Silver Age, you know, for instance. There's going to be there's a lot of possible outcomes. And so this is the risk we take on by entering a hobby that hasn't reached the state of maturity that, say, coins has. You know, I mean, every market has risks, so risk alone is not a reason not to invest. But it should be part of your formula when you're deciding if you want to invest, when you're deciding how much you want to invest, and when you're deciding your exit strategy, which I think is probably a good topic for another video. But you know, if your exit timeline is within 5 years, you probably don't have too much to worry about. You know, we can be very confident that all this stuff is still going to be around. You know, not that much can change in a couple of years. Famous last words. But if you're looking at doing this long term, we're talking, you know, over a decade, the risk definitely increases. And in my opinion, the most important factor is the health of Hasbro and the brand Magic the Gathering and the growth of the game. Trying to think if that is everything I wanted to rant about, because this video has already gotten long. I feel like I start repeating myself after a while. I think that's probably it. So, you know, obviously this is a very complicated topic, and I have no doubt that as I was jumping all over the place, I missed a lot of, say, important counterpoints or interesting data sets. So I would really love your opinions on this. This is one of those videos where I feel like it really needs to be more of a conversation than a rant. So, you know, put yourself 15 years in the future. Take a look at the hobby and tell me what you think. You know, what were the factors that led to its continued presence? Or, you know, what were the factors that brought about its demise? Let me know what you think. And with that, I am done. I just need to look at one more card here and then soak in my pile. Whew, this is going to feed the horde for a while, people. And also, I think there's something wrong with me. There might be something wrong with me. I don't know. I'll worry about that another time. Man, some beautiful ones today. Whew. Look at that. I just love it. All right, that's all I got for you. Thanks for joining me. If you actually watched this long, an extra thanks. You know, most people tune out about halfway through. I don't blame you. I wouldn't listen to me either this long. But if you did stick around, thanks so much. I hope you're enjoying the cardboard as much as I am. And yeah, drop me a message in the comments. I'd like to chat about this more. Thanks so much for watching the video today. If you're enjoying my content and you want to help me out and the channel, one conceivable way to do that would be to rob a bank, launder the money through a car wash, and then send me the cleaned bills. For the record, I'm not telling you not to do the opposite of not that. See you next time.